Okay, in 3.2, we're going to talk about domain and range on graphs. So we're going to write the domain and range given a graph and an interval notation, and then we're going to evaluate functions and find the x and y intercepts from a graph. Interval notation is used to represent solution sets. So parentheses indicate that the endpoints are not included, whereas brackets indicate that they are included. And then parentheses are also always used with infinity and negative infinity because those numbers, we can't include them, right? So also just to make sure, infinity, negative infinity. When you see those symbols, that's what that means. So here's an example of a solution set in interval notation. So we are just going to write what that is. So the 4 has a filled in circle, so that is included. So I'm going to do a bracket. And then the 3 has an open circle, so that is not included. So I'm going to do a parentheses. So it goes from -4 to 3, including -4, not including 3. Okay, when I look at the next one, this is number 3 in your notes. We have two pieces that we're going to put together to form this solution set. So the first one, this arrow shows that it's actually starting at negative infinity. And so again, we use a parenthesis because that's not included, to -2 with a bracket, as that's a closed circle. We're going to do a union symbol, which means we're putting these two things together. 1 is an open circle, so it's going to be parentheses 1 with an arrow pointing in that direction. So that means it's going to go all the way to positive infinity, again with a parenthesis. Okay, so just like on the interval notations, if we use a closed dot, that means the point is included. If we use an open dot, it means it is not included. And then the arrow indicates that the graph is approaching infinity or negative infinity. Again, that symbol, infinity, negative infinity. All right, so let's look at the first one. Remember, domain is our x values and range is our y values. That's the easiest way to think about it. So if I look at all my x values from left to right, I start at -6, and that is a closed circle down here. So I'm going to include -6, so that's a bracket. And then I go all the way to 0 with an open circle up here at 0, 3. So that is a parenthesis because it's not included. For the range, now we're looking at y value, so that's starting at the bottom and going up. So again, I'm starting at -6 with a closed circle. So I do a bracket. And then it's going to go all the way up to +3 with an open circle, so that's a parenthesis. Okay, let's look at another one. If we look at this, we see this arrow here, which tells us that's going to go to negative infinity in the x direction and positive infinity in the y direction. So again, if I look at the domain, I'm thinking left to right. Well, this arrow is telling me that it's going to go to, or it's going to have started at negative infinity. So that's a parenthesis. And then it goes, if I'm looking left to right, it's going to go all the way to 2, and it stops at 2 with a bracket because that is a closed circle. If I'm thinking about the range, again, bottom to top, my lowest y value is -5, and that is a point on the graph, so that is included. So that's a bracket, and it's going to keep going all the way up to infinity. So that's a parenthesis. Again, that's what that arrow shows us. That's what it's telling us. Okay, let's look at one more here. The domain. So I have arrows here on both sides, which means that this is going forever in both directions. So my domain would just be negative infinity to infinity because I have arrows in both ways. Then my range, if I'm looking bottom to top, I'm starting at 1 with the bracket, and those arrows are telling me it's going to keep going up. So that goes to infinity, parenthesis. Okay, now we're going to look at a little bit more information from these graphs. We're going to see what else we can pull out. Okay, so I have my graph here of my function, y equals f of x. So I'm going to start with just my domain, just like we did before. If I'm looking at my x values, I see an arrow here, which means it's going to keep going in this direction. And I see an arrow here, which means it's going to keep going in that direction. So my domain would be negative infinity to infinity. All right, my range, I'm looking at my y values, so nothing goes below -4. That is a point on the graph, so that is included. So a bracket at -4. And then, again, those arrows tell me this is going to keep going up to infinity. So my range is -4 included to infinity. Okay. X-intercepts are where I touch the x-axis, right? So you see 2 here. That would be at 1, 0, and 7, 0. And then y-intercepts, where I touch the y-axis. So we have 1 at 0, 4. Okay? Now, f of 3, remember, that's like saying this is f of x. So this is really saying, where does x equal -3? So here's -3. There's my point there. So that means f of -3 is +4. All right, and then the last one says the value of x for which f of x equals -2. So again, remember, this is in our brains, we could think, where does y equal -2? Because f of x and y are interchangeable there. So I'm going to find where y equals -2. That would be 2 spots we would have right here and right here. So I have x equals 2 and x equals 6. Okay, so we can pull all that information just by looking at the graph. Let's do one more example together. We'll start with domain and range. So again, I see arrows on both ends of my graph. So that tells me it's going to keep going that way and it's going to keep going that way. So my domain is going to be -infinity to infinity. When I look at my range, although I have those arrows, these lines are really just going straight, right? So the value, the y value is not going to increase or decrease. So that means I'm going from -2 to +2, right? And we're including those because there are values, there are points that fall within that. Okay, if I look at intercepts, so x-intercept, where does it cross the x-axis? There's one spot right there. That would be 0, 0, which means that is also the y-intercept, and there aren't any other places that it crosses the y-axis, so that's the only one. All right, when we look at this next one, g of 2, where is x2? That would be right here. So y would be -2. If I look at g of -4, that's right here. So that means y is +2. And then if I look at g of 10, well, that's going to be all the way out here somewhere, but we know that that's not changing, right? So that is going to be -2 because that line is not moving up or down from there. All right, and then lastly, the value of f of x, let me try that again. The value of x for which g of x equals -1. So again, that's saying where does y equal -1. So here's my y equals -1 line, and I see this point right here. So x would equal 1. All right, so we will do some more practice with this in class, but that is using graphs to look at domain and range and some other functions properties.